I've had people say, "You're not Canadian, you're not a truck driver, you're a marketing guy." I've been accused of being a Fed. I've been accused of working with the Feds, which is hilarious because the primary focus of my work at present is fighting the federal government and trying to get some people out of jail. But, you know, uh, conspiracy theory brain online is a sight to behold. Hi, everybody. My name's Gord. No, my name's Gord Magill. I've been a truck driver for most of my life. Sort of fell into this writing and podcasting game here in the last few years, mostly because of my advocacy for the Freedom Convoy and some sort of trucking labor market economics autodidactism that I dabble in by reading lots of nerdy books and papers put out by people who study truckers. I guess I've sort of taken on the job of translating that stuff for my fellow drivers. Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you you need to look around, pay attention. Maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord.
Gord Magill is a trucker with over 25 years of experience. He recently penned an op-ed for Newsweek titled, "Elites Are Smearing Truckers Because We're Doing Their Job Representing the People."
I'm joined now to talk about this by fellow trucker and political commentator nowadays, Gord Magill. Hi, Gord. How are you doing?
I'm well, Mr. Oliver. Thanks for having me.
So Canada has descended to an extremely dark place, and there are a lot of threads to the story. We're going to Canada very soon to see it for ourselves. But before we go, we thought we would speak to Gord Magill, who knows a lot about this. He is a Canadian and a trucker. He was not, strictly speaking, part of the Freedom Convoy 2 winters ago, but he was there, and for a lot of Americans, he was the main way that we knew what was happening because he recorded it and put it out on social media. He joins us now. Gord Magill, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Carlson. Pleasure to meet you.
It's great to meet you.
Could you tell me a little bit about what you've been writing for Newsweek?
Well, mostly at the beginning, I was defending the Freedom Convoy from the sort of lies and inversions of reality we saw coming from Trudeau's bought and paid for media in Canada. And then it's slowly developed into other things. I've written a few articles on, just issues involving truckers. And then as of late, last year, I sort of became more aware of this situation with these fellows that had been arrested in Alberta at one of the Freedom Convoy protest sites. And the Canadian media wasn't talking about it, and the whole case stank. And I had been interviewing people involved with that case for my podcast. My editor at Newsweek heard one of those interviews and asked me to write something about it. I've now written 3 articles for them in relation to the railroading of these 4 men of the Coots 4, who were arrested over the course of February 13th and 14th in 2022. Regular working class guys, 1 electrician, 1 power lineman, trucker and heavy equipment operator, and another guy who owned his own sort of landscaping company. And they just happened to be taking part at the Coots sort of border protest encampment, just hanging out. And they were picked up by the RCMP, arrested, and then later accused of conspiracy to murder police officers. The interesting thing about the case is that they were denied bail twice and kept in remand, which is a sort of form of carceral purgatory where you do not have the rights of afforded convicted felons. And the media asked no questions about this case. There was just a lot of weird things going on with it. There was some sort of malfeasance with the RCMP and the Crown. A publication ban was sought by the defense because it was clear that the media was trying to take unfounded and unproven allegations by the RCMP that they used to get warrants. It turns out a lot of that stuff in pretrial hearings took place last week, a lot of that stuff was proven to be manipulations and fantasy. And the judge in the pretrial hearings appeared to be not very happy with the Crown prosecutor or the RCMP and their inconsistency in their stories. But when you zoom out from the case itself and contextualize it, Justin Trudeau, in his invocation of the Emergencies Act, needed legitimation for it because the Freedom Convoy was totally peaceful. At the mandatory inquest into what happened around the Emergencies Act that was called the Public Order Emergency Commission, it was proven by everybody involved that all of the claims about the Freedom Convoy made in the media were false. There was never any violence. There was never anything bad except, trucks honking in the streets of Ottawa and I guess being a nuisance to the locals. But, their rights to protest and free speech were abrogated by the Emergencies Act. Interestingly enough, some people filed court cases against Justin Trudeau and won a few weeks ago. A judge ruled that Justin Trudeau had in fact violated protesters' charter rights. And the interesting thing about these four guys in coots is that in the ruling that came out of the POEC, part of it hinged on what, Justice Rouleau called, worrying information coming out of Alberta about these armed protesters and accusations about murdering police officers. Well, when he did his ruling, their pretrial hearings hadn't even started yet. It was months after they'd been arrested. So there's all these questions about, did these guys get used to justify Rouleau's ruling and thus Trudeau's invocation? And, whatever happened to the idea of speedy trial? Two of the men have been kept in solitary confinement. Two of the men have had major health issues that were not addressed in the sort of prison system in Alberta, which is administered by the provinces. So there's just all this stuff going on with this case, and the media in Canada have expressed almost zero curiosity in it and have maintained what I would refer to as a code of silence, because as I've interviewed everyone involved with the case and dug further and further into it, I'm left with the conclusion that these four men were in fact political prisoners, which is telling you something for the state of democracy in 2024.
So, what evidence did they have? Surely they couldn't have just acted on absolutely nothing or pulled things out of thin air. What were they acting on?
They were acting on maximally negative interpretations of social media posts, maximally negative interpretations of discussions undercover police officers had with all kinds of people at the site. And then, take your math lady meme or that crazy guy with all of his stuff on the board. And then that's what the Crown and the RCMP were doing to make all these connections. There was a really famous staged photo of all these guns. I mean, they executed a warrant on the sort of travel and camper trailers some of these guys were staying in, brought out a bunch of guns. What was not said by the media is that a lot of those weren't owned by the four guys that were kept in jail for 2 years. It's rural Alberta. People have guns. There's bounties for coyotes. People shoot prairie dogs all the time because they dig holes that then cows and horses trip on. And it's just rural Canada. And I think the government was taking advantage of the fact of the sort of urban-rural divide. Ooh, scary guns. All of them were legally owned. Many of them were owned by people that were not involved in being kept in remand for 2 years. And there was no discussion about any of those details, just, ooh, scary guns. So,
And sorry, where were these guns found?
I have to admit, at this point in the conversation, I was still a little hung up on the idea that the police had apparently found things like pipe bombs and gas masks. I wish that I had pressed Gord a little bit more on this, so I asked him about it after the interview, and he told me that the alleged pipe bombs hadn't even been found anywhere near the protests, and that one of the men had run a gravel quarry which had permits for using industrial explosives. He also mentioned, and I quote, "RCMP and Crown malfeasance will eventually be revealed at trial, but at present no reporting is taking place because of a blanket publication ban on pre-trial hearings downstream of an October Supreme Court decision," end quote. He mentioned that he's also publishing a Substack about this, which will be available in the next couple of days, so look out for that.
In a trailer that was where?
Various locations at the protest site, people's vehicles. Some later, the thing with specifically with the 4 men at Coots is that 2 of the men who were charged with conspiracy to murder police officers didn't even have any guns on site. They were like kept at home. The one fellow, Jerry Morin, police raided his home the following day, and his home is like 400 and some odd kilometers away from Coots. So I don't really know what his legally owned, safely, properly stored guns at home have anything to do with the protest 400 kilometers away. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, once you start examining the evidence, it becomes quite clear they're doing a lot of reaching to try and reach these conclusions. And then a couple of weeks ago, 2 of the 4 men had all of the charges against them dropped, and they were let out on plea deals on very minor charges, which were not part of the original package of charges they were arrested under. So basically, the Crown prosecutor, Stephen Johnston, has admitted that there was no conspiracy. They dropped the conspiracy to murder charges. There's nothing there. So these guys got held in jail for 2 years for nothing. And the reason they got arrested is because they were at a protest site. So, I understand some of your listeners, I'm not sure what all of their politics are, but if you're on the left, traditionally speaking, the left is all about, freedom of speech. You have to protest for the government. And in Canada, your right to protest is now under question, because if the government can pick you up, slap all of these heinous charges against you, put you in jail for 2 years, and at the end of it all, just say, "Oops, sorry, we're just going to drop those charges now and get you to sign off on something else." What right to protest do you have? I mean, that's a pretty serious question implied, wouldn't you say?
This is interesting that this has happened, that this development has happened where the conspiracy charges have been dropped, because I read some of the comments underneath your Newsweek articles, and it seemed like people thought you were being a bit naive. Like, for instance, you mentioned that one of the men who was being held was found to have enormous amounts of ammo. Like, I mean, really enormous amounts of ammo.
No, only enormous amounts of ammo for the fearful urbanite mind who doesn't understand anything about rural or gun culture, right? One of the reasons people stockpile ammo in Canada and the United States is the government is always threatening to bring in new regulations and take your guns away. Every single time, like if you look throughout recent history and you look when Trudeau or Barack Obama or whoever says, "Hey, we're going to impose these new regulations," there's a spike in gun and ammo sales. So people just keep buying it just to have it around. They're not like planning some revolution. It's just that the government is always telling them, "We are coming to take this stuff away." And so the people are like, "Okay, cool. I'm going to buy extra just in case." Like, it's just a sort of natural market reaction. And like, people want to take that and say, "Oh, these people are getting ready to overthrow the government." Well, people stockpiling guns and ammo has been a thing for decades. And thus far, no revolution has yet to take place. So, yeah, I understand that sounds like a lot of ammo, but if you spend any time in rural America or Canada, you'll find people with that amount of ammunition is actually quite common.
I also find it a bit funny that the radical left, which talks about the necessity of revolution, seems equally convinced that it will happen with putting flowers down and kind of having a little dance and a party. But anyways, besides that, um, I do wonder if well, for one thing, what strikes me about this particular issue is the degree to which no one cares about it. I mean, I've had you on this podcast before, and we talked a long time ago on Sublation Media, and the comments were like uniformly negative, like "How dare you have this person on?" And then the most recent podcast that I had, people were like, just completely ambivalent. You know, or
because they don't
indifferent.
get it. Like they don't understand the implication. And they're also falling prey to the whole, you know, good guy, bad guy, us, them, friend, enemy, the sort of Carl Schmitt distinction, right? Like all of those terrible chuds who are probably Trump supporters and Jesus freaks and they hate gay people and all the rest of it. It just allows them to dismiss it. And by dismissing the concerns around what happened to these guys, they're showing that they're extremely ignorant about how government power works. As I said, I hate to repeat myself. If the government can just sweep you off the street at a protest, accuse you of the most heinous, vile crimes, put you in jail for 2 years, and deny you bail, again, I have to blame the media for this, is that people don't understand the context. In 2018, a bill was passed under Trudeau that greatly expanded the granting of bail. I think it was C-25 or C-75. Everybody in Canada gets bail. People who have actually shot and killed police officers that actually did the thing, not just a conspiracy, are out on bail. Repeat sexual offenders are out on bail. People who have, violent, lengthy criminal records, go in and out of jail, are out on bail. But these 4 guys, 0 criminal records between them. I think the one guy might have had like a minor drug possession charge when he was a kid. But between the 4 of them, no history of violence, no criminal records, perfectly upstanding citizens, and denied bail twice, and kept in remand for 2 years, no trial, country where everybody gets bail. I'm sorry, leftists. Next time, let's say Pierre Poilievre wins the election and the fascists of your fantasies take over the government. Next time you guys have a protest, do you want that precedent set where, you and your Antifa buddies are protesting Doug Ford or Poilievre or whoever, and you guys get picked up and thrown in jail for a couple of years? You don't want that to happen to you, do you? I don't want that to happen to you, even though I'm probably diametrically opposed to most of your politics. Because there's this little thing called principles and consistency, which all of the negative commenters on your show don't seem to have.
And this is sort of a basic thing. I thought it was basic. Like, if you ever do a debate as a teenager in high school about free speech, every single one of you will probably reach for that quote. I disagree with what you say, but I defend to the death your right to say it. It seemed to me to be a very basic thing. And also that you defend free speech for your enemies, especially for your enemies, because you know that if it's not granted to your enemies, it's not going to be granted to you. And God forbid your enemies should take power and seek to crush you opportunistically in the same ways, which is exactly what's happening. And it's just interesting that all of these things that I find to be very basic have broken down.
On the other hand, conflict can help us to clarify our values as a society and therefore move forward, a key aspect of democracy. Solutions, therefore, are, and this is descriptive, they're not saying this is how we should solve problems, they're saying this is how problems are ultimately solved or not in our societies. The first is through consensus. Through conflict, people clarify their values and they are able to come to some common ground, a consensus, and we move forward. On the other hand, second solution would be trading. You can bargain. You can trade this thing you actually want for something less and therefore come to an agreement. And then the third thing that often happens is the exercise of naked power. One group can become very powerful, or the moment they get the upper hand, they squash the opposition. And this obviously happened, I think one could argue, recently with the overturning of key abortion legislation in the United States. And in fact, they actually had that plans to overturn that ready and in waiting for when they were able to take power. That they very gradually had this long game plan of putting particular people in particular powerful positions, and then as soon as they had the upper hand, they overturned 50 years of legislation. So this is, I think, a key example of naked power.
And I wonder, so you mentioned, I wondered why don't people care? You mentioned that people have this sort of friend-enemy distinction. Is there another reason why people are sort of insufficiently concerned about what's going on?
I think some of it's downstream of what's happened over the last few years, especially under the COVID regime, and specifically in Canada. I mean, we're both Canadian expats. You know, I live in the United States now, and you're in Europe somewhere, and location undisclosed. And
For my own safety. No.
for your own safety, yes, that's correct. I have guns. I don't know if you do. So, anyways,
Well, I probably do because I'm in a country where having guns is pretty normal.
oh, cool. Oh, based. All right. No, but like the last few years, specifically in Canada, um, the climate of fear created around, Wuhan plague, and then the inclination of Prime Minister Trudeau to scapegoat and outgroup anybody that disagreed with his policies. People will call you plague rats and just say the most insane, vile things about you if you didn't take the vaccine or you showed up at one of these protests to say, I don't want my family bifurcated over these questions. I don't want my grandma to die in an old age care facility by herself. I don't want to be banned from getting on an airplane with no scientific evidence. So the the Freedom Convoy itself was like a mass reaction against all of this stuff, which then Trudeau used as an opportunity to double down and reinforce the sort of cleavage in society that we already saw. So the lack of interest and ambivalence towards these four men is just downstream of all that.
And I wonder if, the media doesn't care about it, the populace doesn't care about it. Interestingly, I think people don't actually care about COVID either. It's actually a really hard sell. So we've, I'm obviously, I help run Civilization Press, and we get book proposals talking about COVID and sort of like thinking about what happened. And, we're a small press. We can't really afford to put these out because they're not going to do well. They're going to tank. Nobody cares. And it's like these questions that were left open. It's like people are like, well, why did that happen? And people are like, well, I guess we'll never know.
Well, there's there's that, and then there's the sort of fatigue of it all.
Mm.
And, there's a lot of people that want to just say, "Can we just get past it? Can we just get past it?" And I understand that. My whole family went through cleavages and disagreements, and some people are probably never going to want to approach it again because it's a sore wound. I am not one of those people because I sort of understand the ramifications of what Trudeau and his government and all of these technocrats and bureaucrats have done. And like, I want some accountability, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. Like there shouldn't be a need for Freedom Convoy, and we shouldn't have a prime minister and a government ripping society in half out of fear. And then downstream of that, cops and crown prosecutors running around and picking people up off the street and imprisoning them for wrongthink, because that's exactly what's happened here.
I think also what's happening is that there is a lot of faith, particularly among Canadians. It's expected, right? The Canadians love rules, but there's generally politically a lot of faith in bureaucracy as a solution to social problems. So if you can simply subject all of life to some kind of process, some kind of checklist, and stipulate the correct and safe behaviors in advance, we
Yeah,
will solve
spreadsheet
a
brain.
huge host. Yeah,
It's spreadsheet brain. Yeah, no, you guys can have that face. No, thank you.
yeah. I think there's a lot of, as you say, this kind of faith in that, um, and people are kind of see this as a solution to social problems, and there's not really much thinking beyond that. So what charges actually are still being pursued?
So there was originally the Coots 4. So Chris Lysak, Chris Carber, Jerry Morin, and Tony Oleanek. Chris Lysak and Jerry Morin are the two gentlemen that were offered plea deals when pretrial hearings resumed after winter break, which would have been February 6th. And I'm not 100% sure, but basically, because the defense team had hired some more competent legal representation of specialists in how warrants are issued, and then another guy who's a specialist at like dealing with evidence derived from wiretaps. It seemed like the government's narrative about these guys, or at least the sort of case they concocted, was going to be pretty well disassembled. And also, um, I I don't want to take too much credit for this, but I'm going to. Um, Tucker Carlson had visited Alberta 2 weeks before these pretrial motions had resumed, and mentioned on stage with the premier of the province, Danielle Smith, this situation with these Coots 4. Mr. Carlson found out about that case from me. I went on a show. He asked me to come on it after reading my stuff in Newsweek. And I don't know. I don't know if that maybe shamed some people in the background. Maybe, the Crown got a little bit scared because they knew there was going to be more scrutiny on it. The other two that are still in jail, I think the one guy may not have been offered a plea deal because he was in between lawyers right when pretrial motions resumed. And the fourth gentleman, I don't know why, but so between new and better lawyers and Mr. Carlson actually talking about it in Canada when nobody else would, perhaps that's what got some things moving.
Okay, because I was going to say it's just interesting that they would the media would be so quiet about it, and you keep these people for a really long time before any kind of serious process is initiated or instigated. I wondered if perhaps now that nobody cares anymore, it's a old story. It's in the interests of the government to quietly kind of drop the issue.
Visit patreon.com/Ashley A. Frawley for part 2.